Hello, and welcome to Literary Lights, our year-long series illuminating new books by Armenian writers in English. I'm Olivia Katrandjian, a writer and the founder of the International Armenian Literary Alliance. Our series is made possible by our partners, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, and the Krikor and Clara Zorab Information Center. Today's event is also co-sponsored by Literary Mama, a literary magazine that has honored the journey and the job of mothering for over 2 decades. I'm really looking forward to speaking with Nicole Haroutunian today about her novel and stories Choose This Now, named one of the best short story collections of the year by Electric Literature. Nicole is also the author of the story collection Speed Dreaming. Her work has appeared in The Rumpus, Story, The Georgia Review, and elsewhere. She hosts and programs the reading series Storytime for Caregivers at the Astoria Bookshop and works in museum education. I had the pleasure of hearing Nicole read her work this summer at IALA's New York chapter event. When I picked up Choose This Now, I couldn't put it down. So I called our executive director, Hovset Markaryan, and said, stop everything. We have to add a book to our series. Choose This Now is a novel and story centered on two best friends, Valerie and Taline. We follow Val and Tal over 2 decades, from their early 20s through their 30s. We see how the friendship between the two women develops and changes as they navigate their careers, art making, dating, pregnancy, and motherhood. Nicole, I will let you begin with a reading from the novel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Olivia and Hofzap and Amanda, for sponsoring and putting on this amazing event. I also had the pleasure of hearing Olivia read at that reading where we met, and her work is incredible. So I was so excited when she liked my book. You know how that hits if you are a writer, when somebody whose work is amazing has really nice things to say about yours. So I'm going to read from a story from Choose This Now that for some reason I don't think I've ever read from aloud at a reading. And I wanted to pick something that's centered on both friendship and motherhood because that's a lot of what Olivia liked about the book. So I'm going to read the beginning of a story called Decision Making for Safe and Healthy Living. It's from the perspective of Taline, and it's set in 2006. If you have the book and you want to follow along, it is page 42. So it's going to be just 3.5 pages that I'll read. I let myself into Zoe's house, a 2-bedroom ranch a few blocks from where we grew up as neighbors, and spot her sitting cross-legged on the floor, her 2-year-old trying to wedge his head into her armpit while she balances her newborn in one arm and holds her cell phone in the other hand. I kick off my sandals and head right past the little family unit to the kitchen sink, where I scrub my hands up to my elbows. Then I drop down onto the nubby carpet and claim the baby, gathering her sweet, sleeping self to my chest. Growing up, Zoe and I were best friends, but now we're more like sisters. I don't mean to say that we're closer now than we used to be, although I also don't mean we're not. Zoe winks at me, extracting herself from Billy's desperate grasp before running for the back porch, phone clenched to her ear. Billy stands up as if to follow her, but then seems to notice that I've got the baby in my arms. My baby, he says. He points at her, a complicated motor skill that involves his thumb as much as his index finger. His blonde hair is sticking out on one side, and his round tummy is exposed under his blue striped shirt. He looks enormous compared to the newborn. What's your baby's name? I ask. I haven't met her before. The baby is sleeping hard, her mouth open, a tiny, improbable snore escaping each time she exhales. She is entirely bald, dressed in a pink onesie with flaps folded over her hands so she won't scratch herself. Billy screws up his face. Minnie? He says, tentative. He looks around for his mother. I think it might be Maddie, I say. Minnie is a mouse. He contemplates this for a second, staring off to the side. Then nodding, he says, yeah, Maddie. You remember my name? He's bashful, knowing he should know, and yet he doesn't. I don't blame him, of course. I only make it out for a visit every few months, and in little kid time, that's an eternity, like asking me to remember the name of someone I met 10 years ago. Taline, I say. Then, slower, Taline. Taline is coming for lunch, he says, repeating what Zoe must have been telling him all morning. He clenches his face again. Taline? Yes, Billy. I have a poop, he says. I sniff the air and can confirm. I lean back, trying to see what Zoe's doing out on the porch. She's pacing, and while she was mostly listening to the other person on the phone before, now she's the one talking. Doesn't look great, whatever's going on out there. I'm holding Maddie right now, I tell Billy. I don't think I can do that and change your diaper. He looks at me with both wispy eyes raised, like there's something major wrong with me. I wear underpants, he says. Good to know, I say, scooting so my back is up against the couch. The baby, all 6 pounds something of her, is getting heavy. I slide us around so that she's curled on my chest and hold her head steady with one hand. I'm not quite a pro at holding other people's babies, but I had some practice with Billy. I was surprised when Zoe told me she was pregnant again. I thought of her as such a new mom still. But Billy's not a baby. He's a person now, standing in front of me, rubbing his eyes with his fists and waiting to be entertained. With a hand not holding the baby, I point to his pile of books. Pick one out, I say. We make our way through quite the stack of animal stories before Zoe finally returns. I'm so sorry, she says. Don't apologize to me, I say. Billy needs his diaper changed and thinks I'm incompetent for not being able to do it while holding the baby. Could have just put her in the bouncer, she says, gesturing. Then she pauses, adjusting the waistband of her stretch pants. I mean, oh my God. First, of course, you shouldn't have done that. Second, Billy doesn't wear diapers anymore. At this, he shoots me a triumphant look. What are you supposed to do when you have to poo? She hoists him under her arm. We'll be back in a few, she says. Promise me you'll never have kids. I promise, I say. She pauses outside the bathroom door and looks at me over her shoulder. I'm kidding, she says. So are you, right? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you can see from this section just how Nicole blends humor with these very real details of raising young children. So I want to start at the beginning. The book begins in first person plural, introducing Val and Tal as a unit. You write that although they don't look alike, they're mistaken for each other and they answer to each other's name. Could you tell us a little bit about who these main characters are for those who haven't read the book yet and what differentiates them?
Yeah, it's such a good question because in some ways there isn't much that differentiates them. I write only fiction, exclusively fiction, but I also just write about myself. So all of the characters that I write are usually me in some way. So for these two, they started off maybe a little bit more different because in that first story, Val, who is the speaker for the most part, she was the protagonist, and then she had this best friend who had like a smaller part in that story. But as I kept writing the book, and I kind of accumulated all of these other stories, I realized that the best friend in that story was actually Taline.
Hmm.
So I went back and I changed her name. And then I used everything I had learned about Taline throughout writing the rest of the book to go back in and sort of flesh out her character in that first story and kind of define their relationship more. So um, Val is like sort of the more like on paper feminist. Like she's read all of the theory. She talks about the male gaze all the time. She has like all of these ideas of herself and how she kind of fits in to her worldview. Taline is sort of she wants to be an artist. She wants a boyfriend. Like she's sort of like plowing forward without this defined sense of self that Val has, but kind of underneath, they're like very similar. And when they start to make different choices, um, that really throws both of them off because they don't know what to do if they're not doing the same thing. So that's kind of the central tension of the book. We're sort of underneath, they're very similar people. And it's about uh, like how they sort of deal with growing apart and what that does for their friendship, but also mostly what it does for their sense of self when they start so similar. I had a best friend who's still one of my very best friends in college. We met instantly. We were roommates, randomly assigned freshman year. And she's nothing like either of these characters because they're both me. Um, but people called us Lindsay and Nicole. And they would say, like, where's your other half? Or people would call me Lindsay sometimes and her Nicole, and we knew what they were talking about. So that part is just like lifted straight from my life.
Thank you. I do see them in the beginning as, because the story starts on Halloween, and so we see them in very different costumes, and you do get a sense of each of them. And I wanted to talk a little bit about costumes. The Halloween, which is Val's birthday, is a recurring setting. The book opens as Val is turning 21, with Val dressed as a birthday candle and Taline as a businesswoman at a holiday party in a thrifted hot pink power suit, which I loved. Throughout the novel, costumes allow the characters to act in ways they wouldn't necessarily act as themselves. Why did you choose to focus on the women's relationships to masks and costumes and yeah?
There's one point closer to the end of the book where Taline says that she just wants to be herself unobserved. And actually, maybe she says that towards the middle of the book. And then she realizes a little bit later that a mask and a costume can kind of let you be yourself unobserved because what people are seeing when they look at you isn't you. They're seeing something else. So there's a way in which I think costumes and masks can let people feel this freedom that they don't feel in their everyday life, where instead of acting like something different, they're acting like more themselves because there's this sort of sense of remove. So that's something I wanted to play with. Just this idea that, like, once a year, there's this little chance to do something that moves your life forward, which I think is what both of them do in certain ways when they're wearing costumes throughout the book.
I think that really comes across, and especially as they're sort of figuring out who they are, it becomes a useful tool. We have many writers with us today, so I'd love to hear about the book's origins and the journey of your journey of writing and publishing.
Um, I write pretty slow. So it took a very long time for this book to come together. And I'm a short story writer. A lot of people kind of take this book as a novel because it's about the same two characters, more or less, over about 20 years. So you can take it as a whole, but each chapter you can also read separately. I call it a novel in stories because it really is both. But it took a pretty long time to actually get to that stage. So once everything was written in not a first draft, but say maybe like a 10th draft, and I had it all put together, and I finally had a publisher and I had an editor. Um, he said I either needed to separate it out a lot more or I needed to consolidate it into one world, one story. Um, so I took that advice, and in the editing process, I went in and kind of like I was saying, I was like, well, if there's a best friend who's named in this story, like we don't need a Susie in this book. Her name used to be Susie. Like she's got to be Taline from this other story, or this teenager. Um, she can't be like a random unconnected teenager. She's got to have something to do with these main characters. And editing with that kind of purpose in mind, it not only consolidated the world, but I think it made everything just more purposeful. Um, so a lot of the writing that I do happens in that like editing process. Um, and I was super lucky to work with the editor and the publishing house that I did. It took also kind of a long time to get there. I used to have an agent. We broke up during the pandemic. So I submitted this book to other agents who were not feeling it because they were like, is this short stories? Is this a novel? I don't know what this is. Um, but small presses are a lot more open to stuff like that, where the genre isn't sort of neatly defined. So the press that wound up acquiring the book is Noemi Press. And for the writers out there, you might know them mostly as a poetry press. And I think that was really helpful because they were like, yeah, I don't know. It's not really a novel. It's not really short stories. We don't care. So that they didn't have a problem with the definition. What they wanted me to do is edit it so it was the best book it could be, wherever it landed, sort of along that spectrum. So, so that's how it happened. It like the sort of final form of the book and the publishing process, they like really work together, and like one wouldn't have happened without the other, I think.
It's interesting to hear because I do feel like there's so much narrative momentum and each story builds on each other and then the last one. And it sounds like, you did some of that work in the later stages, but you do, as a reader, I really wanted to keep coming back to this book and find out what happens to these characters, and you fill in the gaps yourself. You have to figure out what's happened between the stories, and that's part of the fun of it. There's a moment when one of the characters realizes she's not as talented as she thought she was as an artist, and she destroys all of her work. It was really devastating to me as a reader. As artists and writers, many of us must convince ourselves every day that it's worth devoting time and energy to our work, that we have talent, that one day other people will see that, because often no one is asking you to create art or write a book. So much of this book comments on creative struggle, on how we grapple with artistic ambition, on what it's like to be someone who makes art. And I was wondering if you could talk about why you explored that and what you wanted to get across.
Yeah, yeah. So when you dropped out, I started saying like that something I say a lot, and I think other lots of other creative people, if you're frustrated or if nobody is like buying your book that you spent a decade on, like, oh, should I just light this on fire? Um, so when I was trying to figure out the end of that story and what should happen after this artist has just received this like totally devastating critique where another artist looks around the room at her artwork and doesn't even know that he's looking at artwork. He asks her where the paintings are.
Just, it's horrible. It's
So
heartbreaking.
I was like, well, I think if I were her, I would light it all on fire. And at first I was thinking that that was like metaphorical, like how would she light it all on fire? And then I was like, oh, she would just light it all on fire, like she would set the fire. Um, and then I don't think it gives that much away. This book is not filled with like cliffhangers. But you find out like many stories later that that actually didn't destroy the work. She lit it on fire, and then the sprinklers went off, and like the water destroyed her work, and also like lots of other people's in the building, and she got kicked out of her studio. So it was like she tried to do this big gesture, and even that like didn't go in this dramatic artistic way that she thought it would. Um, so that it just seems like a metaphor for like what we're all doing, right? Like we're trying so hard, and either other people are dismissing us, or just our gestures are not working. But the thing is, like, she just hadn't found her form yet. So she thought she was a painter because that's sort of what she knew, and that's this idea she had of herself. And over the course of the book, like that kind of happens, I don't know, not like in the very beginning, but like, I don't know, maybe by here that happens. And by here, she knows more what she's doing, and it's not being a painter, in the way that she thought she was going to. So she sort of needed something very disappointing and very dramatic to happen before she could like really go through that interrogation process and figure out the kind of artist she actually was, not the kind she thought she was. Um, so I think a lot of creative people when they're, in their early 20s, which is where she was when that happened, have maybe a more romantic idea or just a less formed idea of the kind of artist that they are. And it's just, it takes living a little bit longer to figure out what you should be doing, what you're sort of better suited for. Um,
Thank you. That really spoke to me, that moment. Most of the stories in the collection are from the perspective of Val or Tal. Three are not. They're told from the point of view of a character that's somehow connected to the main characters. Why did you choose to include these perspectives?
um, Kind of like what we were talking about before, Val-and-Tal are so insular.
Mm.
Um, and the way that they see each other is it's so intimate, and in like many ways it's really honest, but it's really through the eyes of somebody who's like very wrapped up in like what their identity is in relation to this other person. So I thought we should get out of that dynamic a little bit, just a couple times, and like just have these glimpses of them from the outside, not from like their sort of reflection, but from somebody who is like sort of outside of that dynamic of the two of them. So I think in each of those three stories, you get like a little glimmer of what one or both of these two is sort of like to other people. But also just sort of an idea that like the other people in their lives are also having these same kinds of dramas, just like off camera. So I just wanted to kind of like expand the world a little bit and give just these other sort of glimpses of what's happening around, to kind of fill out this more central dynamic.
I thought it worked really well, and it was interesting to see sort of these two characters from the outside, especially when you see, other characters reflecting on this opening Halloween. It was really eye-opening to me. I'm going to ask you to read a section from one story in which a pregnant Valerie visits her husband's grandmother in a nursing home.
Okay, this is page 80. I'm gonna read about 2 pages. Um, and there, so Valerie and her husband Mark this is a little bit after what you just heard. They're visiting Mark's grandmother at her assisted living, but they're at a deli nearby. Um, and she's just gone to the bathroom to throw up, because she has very bad motion sickness, not motion sickness, morning sickness, and she's trying to conceal that. When I return to the table, Mark looks anguished, but Dinah is placid, clearly at home here. I ordered you an egg cream, she says. Bubbles settle the stomach. She winks at me and my mouth sours again. What does she know? I glanced at Mark, who appears immersed in his platter of stuffed cabbage. Dinah's right, though. Chocolate egg creams are magic. The stomach-coating dairy, the bubbles. I have two, leaving the kugel Mark chose for me mostly untouched on my plate. Dinah takes an eternity to finish one cheese-filled blintz. As she savors each bite, she tells us about Saul. He got an electric wheelchair, but typical, he didn't learn how to use it right, she says. The day he brings it home, he rides into the lobby and boom, he runs over 2 women. The next morning, he was back in the regular chair, an aide pushing him around. I kick Mark under the table. He swallows his cabbage and kasha. Grandma, we actually thought you were using a wheelchair now. That's why you moved to the first floor? Dinah puts down her fork. Your father told you that? She taps a long pink manicured nail on the table. Let me ask you this. Do I seem like I need to use a wheelchair? We're silent, shaking our heads. When you get old, she says, people stop listening to you, if they ever did to begin with. I was in a marriage for 56 years where I could have been delivering the Gettysburg Address and no one would have known it. I nudge my straw around in my empty milky glass. My kids learned from their father. I don't know how I could have done it differently. Maybe it was just the time, but I wonder. She picks up her fork again, then puts it down and gestures for me to come closer. I scoot my chair and hold out my hand, but she reaches past it, reaches to touch my stomach. Her hand is cool, gentle, immovable. Mark's eyes flit to mine. He must have let the news slip, or at least confirmed her suspicions. He looks terrified that I found him out. I've never been wrong, Dinah says. All the rushing to the bathroom, that glassy look in your eyes. Don't be mad at him for telling me. I knew the moment I saw you. I am faint for a moment, reorienting to the room, to a world in which this information is on the outside. Not just a small internal pulse, only for me, Taline, Mark, and the doctor. Hand still on my belly, Dinah turns to Mark. You tell your daughter, she says. You tell her to listen when her mother talks, okay? Maybe she's right about this too. Maybe we'll have a daughter. Maybe she'll be blonde when she's born like Mark. Maybe she'll be quick and sharp like Dinah. Maybe she'll be, somehow, like me. You'll tell her that? I ask Mark. Although as soon as I ask, I know he will. There's no mystery to Mark. I try another bite of kugel. Dinah's palm is still on my stomach, and along with the morning sickness, another feeling starts to swell somewhere beneath the surface. Anticipation. I want to meet this new person. She is growing as we sit at this table together. Eyes, a spine, 10 tiny toes. In just a few weeks, she'll be able to hear. I'll say to her, baby, there is so much you already know. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I love that moment. I wanted you to read that because the settings of these stories are often surprising. You place quotidian relationship dynamics against unexpected backdrops, which fuels the dramatic tension in some way. In the section you just read, only through the grandmother does Valerie realize she's actually excited to have a baby. In another, a character finds herself at a masked swingers party. In another, a woman trying to get pregnant hunts down her husband at a monastery where he's on a philosophy retreat. Did you make a conscious choice to diversify the settings, or did this just happen naturally?
Um, I think it's kind of a combination of both. Um, I talked before about how much of the writing of this book happened in the revision. First drafts are very hard for me. I know there are some people who like the first draft is the part they like, and they start stories and maybe never finish them. For me, starting something is so hard. So I have to trick myself into doing it. So if I hear a little snippet from somebody about like accidentally going to a swingers party on New Year's Eve, which somebody told me about happening to her, I stopped her as she was talking and I said, can I take this from you one day? Like I might need this setting. And she said, yes. So I jotted that down. Years ago, my husband and I visited his grandmother in her assisted living, and there were just some like incredible details that I just like filed away. Um, Similarly, the monastery once in college, we had like a leadership retreat in what used to be a monastery, and it was a wild place to be. So I just kind of have like a list, either in my head or like a literal list in the notes app in my phone, sort of mixed in with my gross, very hard to find. But usually, if I write something down, I'll remember it, just the act of like writing it down. And then I'll try to take like something from column A and something from column B and smush them together. So, I started writing about morning sickness and I started to call it motion sickness because I got like such terrible motion sickness um, that I'm used to talking about that. So I used some of those details to write about this character having morning sickness. And then I was like, okay, well, that's not what the story's about. Like, what if I put her, puking in the deli next to the assisted living? Like that's something's got to happen there. Um, so it's sort of that, like just forcing myself to find the story by combining two things, three things, and just seeing how I can write from like point A to point B.
I love that. I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
Thank you. You write with raw honesty about early motherhood, which I appreciated. At one point, Val says, "I couldn't wait for my daughter to go to school to need me less." But Taline feels differently. She says, "I feel like I'm constantly in mourning. I'm so in love with her at every stage, but I'll never meet newborn Soraya again. I'll never see her at 6 months again or experience that moment with her again when she finally figures out that the baby in the mirror is her. I just want another day with each of those people, you know?" She keeps disappearing on me. I feel both of these things so acutely myself every day, which is interesting that you say both of these characters are you, because I think we can hold these things, and I think Amanda of Literary Mama has written about this as well. Uh, to the point where I have an almost identical passage in my novel in progress to Taline's feeling of mourning. I'm telling you now, so later you don't think I stole it from you. But
Oh, I would
um,
never.
but I feel this and I think maybe I talk about it to the point where my older daughter has commented that she now misses her cute tiny younger brother who's growing up. So maybe I should control myself. But often women writers are asked how they can juggle motherhood and writing. I don't want to ask you that. A few years ago, I remember The writer Lauren Groff was asked this, and while she acknowledged that it's a very important question, she said, "Until I see a male writer ask this question, I'm going to respectfully decline to answer it." I think the more interesting question is, how does motherhood fuel your writing?
Yeah, and that if I do get asked that other question, I answer it this way because I think motherhood has only made me a better writer in terms of like really exploding what I have to write about and making me so much more focused and efficient. Um, in the past, before I had a child, I could just, fritter away 8 hours um, writing a sentence, deleting it, going on social media, taking a walk. And now, like, not that I don't do those things too, but I do it less. I just like have really learned how to use my time better. Because you have to just use all of your time all the time. Um, and it's I think a really interesting dynamic to write about, a sort of parent-child, mother-child dynamic. But it also has shown me so much about myself that like I feel more interested in writing about like um, it's so many things, not just motherhood, because I think that my perspective has just shifted. Um, Also, the community that I have now versus before I became a parent. Um, People like Amanda, but also like there's a whole bunch of people on this call that I know. Actually, maybe I don't know most of you through motherhood writing stuff. Amanda, I do. But like Sarah and April, who are here, are mother writers. And there's just such a community of support um, out there if you want it. And publications like Literary Mama, I just feel like interacting with them is so different than interacting with other literary journals where like they not lovely ones. Certain ones I've had great experiences with. So I don't want to generalize, but some editors and literary journals, they like make you feel like you're so lucky to be talking to them. You're so lucky that they're paying attention to you. And publications like Literary Mama, like the sort of motherhood centric, like community centric publications, it's more like we're all in this together, not like we're doing you this huge favor by bestowing our favor upon you.
Thank you. Thank you. Speaking of motherhood, I love the cover by the artist Caroline McAuliffe. It's from a series called Invisible Mothers. Could you tell us what this image was inspired by and why you chose it?
Yeah. Um, so there's something that I wrote about in this book. It's um it's that moment actually I shared where Valerie says that she wants to be unobserved. And at first I wrote it that she felt like she was a mother in a Victorian photograph where there was this practice of putting like a rug over the mother so that they could hold their baby or toddler still for a picture because the exposure time was so long. You had to sort of immobilize these little children. And so there's all of these like very eerie, kind of hilarious, like super metaphorical Victorian photographs of mothers with like blankets draped over their head holding the baby. So the baby's the focus, the mom is supposed to blend into the background. So lots of contemporary artists and writers have thought about this phenomenon. So at first I was writing about how she wanted to take off that blanket and have people see her. And then I was like, actually, because I saw Caroline's project, I started seeing her posting these images from it on social media. And I was like, oh, I don't think that that is what my character wants. My character wants to be under the sheet. She wants people to stop looking at her. She wants to stop feeling judged for her parenting. She wants to blend in. So Caroline's work and like really looking at what she was doing, I think it made my story better. And because I published with this small press, when they asked me if I had ideas for the cover, I was like, oh, I do. Um, let me see if Caroline would be open to it. And I really didn't think she would because so she this is her project, but that's her wife under there and her baby. Um, and I was like, I don't think she's gonna want her baby and her wife on the cover of my book. Um, and I wrote this like very impassioned, what I felt or hoped was like convincing request, but then I was also like, I totally understand. If I were you, I would say no. Um, and she wrote back, oh, I attached the whole book so she could read it and make sure she like, felt inspired by the content. And she wrote back probably in under 10 minutes. And she was like, here's the file. I'm honored. Please go right ahead. And I was like, are you sure? And she's like, I'm an artist. Like, I want people to see this work. And putting it on the cover of your book means more people are going to see it. And it means like we're here talking about her work. So she was like, this is what I do this for. Like, of course I want you to use it. Um, so there's just so many layers of meaning. And also at the last story in the book, Taline winds up having her child finally with a man who is from Iran. So she is sort of musing about what it would be like to live there instead of in New York, where they live in Queens, and what it would be like to be pregnant and wearing a chador. So, like, that sort of felt referenced here, just the masks to the focus in the book. So, Caroline's work, all of these textiles mean something to her. And she has stories behind each one of them, something related to her family, something related to her marriage, her love story, the whole thing. So she's got like her layers of meaning here, and then there's the layers of meaning that go with the book too.
Thank you. It's such a metaphor. So many. I'm glad you mentioned the last story because I wanted to talk about that. Although we could talk about sort of how art and museum education and your work has fueled your writing as well.
Oh yeah, let me just add to that. If Caroline had said no, I really wanted to have the work of a living artist on the cover of this book for that reason too, like because of my work in museums and with artists, but also in the book, Taline winds up with my same career. So yeah, there's that layer to it too.
Well, the last story begins in the fall of 2016, just before the presidential election. The characters attend protests and grapple with being able to leave and return to the United States without being detained. You mentioned the character has married an Iranian. Why did you decide to venture into politics in this last story? And as we relive that time with a second Trump presidency, what would you say to writers trying to use fiction to process and comment on what we're seeing and experiencing?
Um, Earlier drafts of this book, I think, had a lot more politics. Um, there's still sort of echoes of that. There's one story set in 2008 that has some election stuff, some recession stuff. And I wound up just having to go through and like lose some of it in the way that I lost like other things too in the book that just didn't didn't serve the structure of the story or didn't sort of serve the arc, or maybe I got too like didactic. So I didn't really mean for it to only be this last story that's like the most political. Um, but I think it sort of wound up that way.
And of course, you
And
can argue that the whole thing is political, but I just mean sort of this last story, particularly focuses on that.
yeah. Um, and I think just sort of going back to the like autofictionness of my writing, it's not really autofiction, but I was pregnant at that same like during 2016, that whole election, and that was like a really wild time to be like bringing a new person into this context. And then just like conversations my family was having, people who didn't feel comfortable traveling anymore, and just the way that that sort of separates families, as I'm sure like many of you, a lot of my family lives outside of the United States, and at the time that I started writing that story, it just was like very stark that um, I wasn't pregnant anymore when I started writing it, but I had, a baby and then a toddler because it took probably years to write that story. Um, so just thinking about all the time, how could we not in 2016, 2017, today, it's just kind of all we think about. It just influences everything. So I was like, how I can't write about these years without writing about this. Um, and then it just seemed like a way to kind of bring it all together at the end and then also give it a sense of sort of like ongoingness. That these are issues and this is the context that these women are going to be raising their children in going forward. So there's also like a little bit of grappling throughout the book. I mean, I hope not a little bit. I hope more than a little bit of the relative privilege that these characters have. And then um, this moment, the election in 2016, there's just a lot to answer for. So I wanted to sort of make sure they were answering for it too.
Thank you. You do that with humor, though, and I appreciate that. I want to invite Amanda Fields, the editor-in-chief of Literary Mama and a co-host of the podcast This Mama is Lit, to speak about the magazine and ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for letting us co-sponsor the event. I'm really excited to support this book. I think it's beautiful, and I appreciate the what you said about our journal, Nicole. And what I love about the book is the focus on the ins and outs of friendships among women and the life and through different life changes. And I really love the time span because it speaks to where I come from in my generation. So I really related to the characters. And since we're co-sponsoring, I wanted to say we so often marginalize stories about and by mothers. And what I've found in editing the journal and in co-hosting the podcast is that it's such a vast space and we have so much more to write and think about in that space than people give us credit for. And I really appreciate how this book converses with that space of motherhood. And I've talked with you before about a moment in Choose This Now when one character asks for another to hand over her feminism card. And that made me laugh out loud when I read it. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit with our audience here about how you reflect on developing your feminist perspective and how that relates to your mothering.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, because there can be this disconnect, right, between how we um how we think and how we secretly think, or everything that we have to unlearn, I guess. Um, and that character, she was talking to her closest friend. It was like she's talking to herself. And the things that were coming out of her mouth, her friend was like, I have to stop you here. Like, hand over that card. And, if her friend had been saying the same thing to her, she would have responded in the same way. But it's one thing like sort of letting your guard down and saying these like deeply ingrained, like, well, if that person can find a man, like, why am I single? Kinds of things to your best friends. But like, they would never say that in front of their daughters. I would never say something like that in front of my daughter. So there's always like kind of, I try to be like genuinely myself with my child. Uh, but I do kind of have to think on two levels sometimes, like when I'm explaining things or like sometimes withholding things or just, changing my own mind while I'm talking about things with her. Um, because you just hear it kind of differently when you're saying it to somebody who, like, you're shaping their worldview right now. And the way that you live and the way that you act and the way you explain things to them, it's going to be like the context they grew up in. Um, so yeah, it's just sort of that like meta level of like trying to hear myself and make sure that what I'm saying and what I'm modeling for her is what I want to be like what is sort of swirling around in her head. Um, And then I talk to my friends and get like reality checks from them. But yeah, I want to just keep getting better and like doing better for her.
It's a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
especially when you get, 17 follow-up questions and you want to answer all of those, with it thoughtfully but you're trying to do 17 different things at the same time. So,
Or
uh,
like 2 years later, she says, "Remember when you said this?" Like, oh, no, I don't. I don't. But you
uh,
do.
well, if let us know if any of our audience members have questions for Nicole. But Nicole, I'd love to hear what you're working on now, and what are two books you would recommend to our audience?
Yeah. Um, so I have a manuscript for a new novel and stories. This is my form, sticking to it. Um, and so I'm trying to find a home for that, which um, can be a long process. It's already been a little bit of a process. Let's see, like 7 months maybe since I finished my draft and have been trying to get it out into the world. And sometimes that kind of work like can crowd out like actual writing. Um, so very recently, like in the past month, I have set some goals for myself where I want to be writing some shorter stories. That are not like attached to a book project or anything, just so that I'm also creating while I'm doing this more like administrative and aspirational work of trying to get this book out. Um, the new one um, covers a lot of similar territory. What's a little different about it is it's just about one character. So it is short stories that kind of have an overall arc to them, and it's very focused on motherhood. It takes on a lot of pandemic motherhood, and also a lot of friendship in there. It's like it's not the same book, I promise, but it's all the same themes. So if you like this one, you will like that one. If this one was not your thing, hopefully I did enough different. The structure is a lot more experimental than this one. Um, so that's what I'm working on. So here's my recommendations. This name is not going to be new to most of you, but Ida Zalelian, she is the New York chapter head of IALA. And I'm sure that you've all read, those of you who are familiar with the organization, her novel, which came out last year, just before mine did, All the Ways We Lied. This is her poetry book, which is called Dissonance, that came out just a few months ago. And, she's out there. She's here, right? Are you here still, Ida? Um, I feel like she hasn't been talking about this one quite as much. And let me tell you, this book is incredible. This is poetry. It's a poetry chapbook, and there's so much in it. When I heard her read from it, I was struck with like just how fierce it is and powerful. When I read it myself, what really got me is the food. She writes poetry that just incorporates um, like the sensory details of food, food preparation, eating it. It's like it's there for uh, context, but it's also there as a metaphor. Like a dissonance. So good. And then I want to shout out this story collection. Thanks for This Riot by Janelle Bassett. This came out last year. And it is just so weird and lively. And if you want to be convinced that short stories are the best literary form that you can do, no better than this book. It's just so singular and special. Thanks for This Riot, Janelle Bassett.
Thank you. Thank you. And I second Ida's, the recommendation of Ida's book. I have one question in the chat. Sarah Weiss asks, I love what you said about thinking on two levels, the way you react and how you'll be perceived by your child. This seems to connect to the idea of masks, identity, etc. in the book. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. But I think that maybe the difference is like, at least in my real life, I'm trying to merge it more. Like I'm trying to become the things that I say to her. Um, rather than like have that sort of separate, like performative. I don't want the sort of like feminism that I'm giving her to be performative. I want to like believe the things that I still need to sort of unlearn and undo. So it might, maybe it's starting as a mask, but I'm trying to merge it with my face.
I like that. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. It's just been an absolute treat to talk to you about this book. And if I was asked my reading recommendation, it would be choose this now. If you haven't already, please pick up this book. You can always ask your library to order it as well, or both. Thank you for sharing this book with us. You can also purchase books through IALA's bookshop.org shop and support programming like this by donating on our website. Next weekend is our Emerging Writers Showcase on Sunday, October 26th. I hope to see you there. It will feature the mentees in our summer mentorship program and the winners of our Young Armenian Poets Awards. And our next Literary Lights event will be on December 6th, and it will feature Tenny Arlen's poetry collection, To Say With Passion, Why Am I Here? So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Nicole, and choose this now. Don't miss this book. It was an absolute pleasure to read.